Last week, we talked about the age of elders, and the Greek word there is presbyteros, okay, which just means elderly, okay, and it does not just mean elderly like an elderly person, but one who is looked upon with respect and deference because of his experience and maturity. So just being old is not the primary consideration for being an elder. And in fact, we talked a little bit about you could wait too long and, kind of limit the number of years that you're able to serve. And 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 6 was especially important. It doesn't give an age, but it says not a novice, not a beginner, unless they fall into condemnation of the devil, being puffed up with pride. Okay, anything anybody wanted to say that they didn't get to say last week about age? Any thoughts during the week at all?
I had a thought that came to me later about not a novice, and because it points to pride as the potential pitfall, we were thinking in terms of knowing enough, but I'm not sure that's really the idea, because I think really what would be in mind would be having a more realistic view of one's own abilities and shortcomings.
Okay.
And a little humility.
Okay. Yeah. The last principal that I worked for, when I worked for him for 7 years, in the first couple of years, we'd have some kind of assemblies. And at that time, he wasn't 50 yet. And he could run and do handspring backflips across the gym floor. And of course, all the kids thought that was 7 years later. He was not doing that anymore. In fact, about the last time we ever did it, he's like, I think that might be the last time we ever. So, able to make those kind of mature decisions. Like, I got to find another way to wow the audience here. All right, and an elder must be old enough to realize that shepherding is not about him. It's about the flock and its welfare. And then we talked about the concept of husband of one wife. And there is some different thoughts on this. The passage from Timothy does say husband of one wife, but in Greek it only means a man of one woman. And some folks believe that you have to have been married only one time in your life. So if you're widowed or divorced and you remarry, that disqualifies you. That's one position. Thank you. And then the other position, I think, which is probably I would say probably the more held position in the church, is that you're a one-woman man. You're currently married to one woman and happily married and faithfully married to one woman, and all those things that you would expect out of a marriage anyway. I think that's my last. Oops. Okay. Any thoughts about the one-woman wife? You know what I meant. Husband of one woman. All right, I'm going to get my act together here in a second.
I think just this class today, because I thought we kind of arrived at this idea last time, but a candidate for elder must have a wife that he is legally married to. And so if you have somebody up for an eldership, to be a part of the eldership, are they married to one person legally in the eyes of God? If the answer is yes, they check that box. If the answer is no, they can't check that box. their spouse has died, they're no longer a one-woman man because they're no longer married. Scripture is very clear about what happens to a marriage when a spouse passes, or even if both spouses pass. And then in the question of a divorce, if it's a legal divorce, he's remarried, a scriptural divorce, and he's remarried and he has a right to be married to her, he's still a one-wife man.
Right. And this was one of the questions in the little survey that we started this study with. I forget what my exact wording of the question was, but it was basically something along the lines of, does everyone have to be in complete agreement once we get to the point of having names and deciding? And the answer is, well, we saw that the answers were split. And we'll talk about that when we get closer to the end. And this may be one of those things that comes up at that time. All right. Go ahead.
This is always a difficult conversation, and I think that you can see from just trying to piece it all together in scriptures too, that, the New Testament is not case law. It's not written like that. It's a series of letters to individuals grounded in a time and a place that we can still glean the essence of apostolic teaching from, but it's not the type of document that we might prefer, like you might find over in Leviticus or something like that. And so there's a great deal, I think, of prudential judgment that has to be exercised in these questions. I think we'll maybe even talk about this today, but for example, there's going to be qualifications given for the deacon's wife, but no mention really of the elder's wife. And
Don't teach my class yet.
But you come across a scenario like that, and you're thinking, well, really, that the deacon's wife should be held to a higher standard than it. And so you have to kind of exercise your judgment on that. And speaking of the place-to-place thing, it was often pointed out that the list that Paul describes to Titus is not identical to the list that Paul describes to Timothy. And so there's a possibility that there could have been men appointed in one place that would not necessarily have been suitable in another place. And it's just very challenging to try to wrestle with all these things, but it's something I think we have to exercise a great deal of wisdom and judgment with. And I would say probably a good deal of grace towards each other for not passing immediate judgment upon the decisions of another congregation, assuming that they were made in good faith.
Okay, so we ended with that question. Are there qualifications for elders' wives? So the verse we ended with and asked you to think about was 1 Timothy 3:11, which says, "Their wives likewise must be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things." And to truly understand the point here, you gotta kind of dig in to this verse. So we'll start with, and let me be clear, I'm not saying you have to be a Greek scholar by any means, but once in a while it does kind of help to look at it and try to figure out what was going on. Okay, here is an interlinear for this verse, and the word for wives being used here is gynukos, okay, which in Greek, it depends on the context as to what it means. Last week I mentioned the German word Frau, okay, it's the exact same kind of word. In German, if you use the word Frau, you have to use context to understand if you're talking about a woman, because it does just mean a woman, or are you talking about someone's wife, because it translates to Mrs. as well. You use it as a title just like we use Mrs., okay? And this word is used in all those ways throughout the New Testament. It's used 221 times in the New Testament. And in every one of those, you got to understand the context. Who's being spoken to and what are they speaking about? And sometimes it's not wholly clear. Come on. So, in This is the ESV that I have here. And the word there, if you look here at the interlinear, there is not a Greek word that translates for that pronoun. Okay? So the ESV translation was trying to make some clarity here. But with the way we use English and the way we use the word there, okay, who was it talking about in the passage just before this?
Deacons.
It was talking about deacons.
And after.
Yeah,
Okay.
sandwiched, yeah.
So, in our English understanding, we would assume, okay, it's talking about deacons' wives. Well, first of all, it's not there, is one thing. Okay? And not every translation puts it there. Okay? I thought this worked. The NASB, for example, New American Standard, just says women must likewise be dignified and all the other stuff. The Christian Standard Translation says wives likewise should be worthy of respect. And then other translations either say the women or the wives. Okay? So you can see even with the English translation, there's a little bit of figuring out to do. Who exactly are we talking about? So then we have to go down some of the paths that Jeremy was mentioned here. For example, should all women be dignified or only deacons' wives, right? If you're not a deacon wife, you could be act however you want to, okay? 1 Peter 3:7 says, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. So, are only wives, or just specifically deacons' wives, are they the weaker vessels? Or are daughters weaker vessels? Are maids, unmarried women, are they weaker vessels? You have to kind of figure, because it's the same word. It's the same word there. For Titus 2:3, whoops, I don't think my slides match my notes. Or 1 Timothy 2:12, I do not permit a woman to teach. It's the same Greek word. So, again, we have to ask, are all women prohibited to teach, or just wives, or just specifically deacons' wives? If we're applying the same thinking as to 1 Timothy 3:11. 1 Corinthians 14:34, the women, same Greek word, should keep silent in the churches. So is he talking about all women, or just women that are wives, or just specifically deacons' wives?
Something that, in these kind of discussions, I try to bring out every time, and I actually said it yesterday to someone. The ultimate definer of a word is always the context. Above and beyond any dictionary definition,
The what is?
the context is the ultimate definer of a word. And so you can't just impose a definition on a word and then treat it the same in every passage in which it occurs. So
Okay. So, the question is then, and I think a couple of you have said it, the qualifications for elders and deacons, with the exception of with elders of maybe two things, shouldn't those be the qualifications for all Christian men? Shouldn't all Christian men strive to exhibit, to manage their household, to be well thought of in the community, and all those? That should be the goal of any Christian man. Okay? So likewise, shouldn't that be the goal of any Christian woman? Right? The things that are mentioned for women in these passages, and I think we could see that is the better application of all this. Okay, so dignified, which means honorable or grave, that comes from 1 Timothy 3:11, but it's mentioned for women in Philippians 4:8 and Titus 2:2. Not malicious gossips, in other words, not false accusers or slanderers, That's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 3:11, but also in Titus 2:3 for
I thought it said they're not to be devils.
not to be what?
Devils.
Well, diablos is the Greek word. Temperate, okay, that's mentioned in several places for women. Faithful or trustworthy in all things, okay? These are qualities all Christians, both men and women, are to display. Okay? Who would say to a Christian man, it's okay for you to gossip, right? I mean, we're not going to say that, right?
I think this is really gearing towards the maturity, the spiritual maturity. We all strive to, meet those expectations.
Yeah, you're
But
right.
I think it's the spiritual maturity that it's defined that you have to be spiritually mature to qualify for this.
Right. We have to grow, right? From the milk to the meat, from the babe to the adult. Jeremy?
I mean, in some ways, I think it does kind of back up to a qualification, because if you look at one of the qualifications for the elder, it's the idea of that he's well thought of in the church and that he's well thought of in the community, outside of the church. He has a good reputation. And the fact of the matter is, for good or for ill, our spouses have a great bearing on our reputation and how people perceive us. And if your spouse is wild or unfaithful or gossip or this or that, or that had people think something about the other partner because of that. And so I would think it's very true that your spouse, the person that you're yoked with and bound with, one flesh, all the rest of it, people are absolutely going to make judgments and have opinions about you based on your spouse.
Yeah.
And another requirement, one that ruleth his own house well. I mean, if you're not putting a check on your spouse's evil behavior, you're not ruling your house well.
Right. Ruby, don't take your love to town.
Well, I think we can summarize and generalize even further. They're to be Christ-like. I mean, if you just want to summarize it, they're to be Christ-like, and I do think the marriage piece is that the elders are to mirror the pattern of the church, with Christ as the head, the church is the body, with Christ as the husband, and the church is the wife. I think that is a pattern that is to be physically manifest to the world. I think that's why they limit to the husband and one wife in the early church, and going forward.
And I'm going to sort of not using this particular topic, but I'm kind of shore up that kind of thinking in the sermon today. What our goals should be for all of us as Christians. We're all growing all the time. It's just, and we'll never be perfect, but those that we ask to serve as elders, in our way of thinking, they're closer, they're closer to attaining that level than others. Ash.
So I think the effect in having the qualifications there for the wives is that there's an acknowledgement that we all have flaws, and it's isolating a certain set of flaws that are inadmissible. They're not going to be tolerated for that deacon or elder to be installed, if this is present. So I mean, yeah, we're all to live up to the standards that are being presented generally, other than marriage itself, being bound or having children. But it would be inexcusable or inadmissible to have somebody who had these flaws.
Right. Okay, so we've kind of already asked this, but would anyone argue that a deacon's wife must not be a gossip, but an elder's wife can? No, I don't think anyone, I mean, they might, but it would not be a very logical argument.
I would apply with a great deal of consideration a fortiori argumentation, that whatever is true for a deacon's wife would, in all likelihood, be even more true for an elder's wife. And a fortiori argumentation is, if person A can beat person B in an arm wrestling match, and person C can beat person A in an arm wrestling match, then it would be safe to assume that person C could beat A and B in an arm wrestling match.
And I think that's a logical approach. So, prior to verse 11, it says, the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of the overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and all of that. And I won't read the whole thing. So my question is then, what kind of a woman helps a man achieve these standards, right? Because the wife is the helpmeet to the man, right? It's not going to be a woman that's contentious and battles him about everything, right? That vies for the ultimate authority in the household, and that challenges his everything. It's not going to be that kind of woman, right? It's going to be the kind of woman that meets all of these other standards that we looked at.
The Proverbs 31 woman specifically mentions in chapter 23, or verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And I know it's not exactly a one-to-one what they mean by elders, although it may be a little closer than most people realize. This is a woman whose husband is recognized as an elder of the people. And this is the type of woman that she is.
Right.
And says the things that she has done and is doing.
I'll dip into my sermon one more time because it kind of fits here. And of course, he doesn't fit these circumstances exactly, but we can move him forward in time and consider him. Think of the prophet Hosea, right? Who did God tell him to marry? A prostitute, right? So if we advance that into the time that Paul's writing to Timothy, would anybody say that a woman that is actively working as a prostitute, no one would consider a man like that for an eldership.
And the whole point was the disrepute that it put Hosea into, and
Right.
to show it forth as an analogy of how the people were treating God.
All right, so but our bottom line for all of us, I mean, we all have standards. No matter whether we're seeking an position and to serve in that way, or if we're just serving quietly as a Christian, I mean, we all have standards that God expects us to be working towards accomplishing. All right, so let's look at some of these things then. In the ESV, the wording might be different. It says the wives are to be reverent. The ESV says dignified. The Greek word there is semnos, okay, which literally means worthy of respect, or dignified, or serious, or sober-minded, of good character. And the King James uses the word grave there. That's a pretty somber word, but it does suggest a woman of good and honorable character. Does that mean she's a woman that's not allowed to have any fun? No. But she knows when it's like a teacher I used to work with would say to the kids, fun is fun, but when it's done, right? So she's a woman that, people think that Christians don't have fun anyway, right? That's the stereotype that we battle all the time. We do have fun. We have lots of fun. And there's times when it's appropriate to be having fun, but there's times when it's time to be serious. This guy, we mentioned him last week, but he says that the word grave is the translation of semnos, the same word used of the deacons. It speaks of that combination of gravity and dignity which invites the reverence of others. Okay?
One of the Roman virtues was called gravitas, and it was one of the most cherished of the virtues. Anything that a person in standing that afflicted or touched their gravitas was a great concern to them.
Okay. So think of, an equivalent or a role model might be, and I don't only mean this in a broad sense, not in a spiritual sense, but the First Lady of the United States, right? We think of first ladies that we've had in the past, right? Nancy Reagan, all the way back to Jacqueline Kennedy, right? She was put together. I mean, that's as far back as I go personally. But, she was a lady, right? She was a lady. Nancy Reagan was a lady. I don't remember too much about Lady Bird, so but.
A sense of propriety. What's appropriate and
Right.
dignified.
And we've probably all seen people who are morally flippant, and that's definitely excluded.
So, Rosie O'Donnell, does she fit this mold? Roseanne Barr, Joy Behar, however you say her name, right? And the one that holds up the fake head of Donald Trump on Kathy Griffin, all right? They don't fit this, okay? So we understand, and I'm sure, I imagine that the first ladies have fun and stuff like that. But at the state dinner or whatever, they know it's time to be on point. All right. Next word was slanderers. Okay, and that is the Greek word diabolos, which is our word what? Devil. Right. That's where the same word is used there. Okay. In other words, a malicious talker, a malicious gossip, a scandal monger running around with the latest. Y'all remember the old Sunday comic Snuffy Smith, right? When she would run back to the back fence to tell the latest thing, right? So on many occasions, the elder will have private information about others that needs to remain private. Things he cannot even share with his wife. He shouldn't, right? Now, there are times when I think it's appropriate, if an elder has to go visit with someone, counsel someone, especially if it's another sister, and he should take his wife with him. Okay, but she has to be the kind of person that might overhear privileged information and can keep it to herself. Let's see what else. Sober-minded, nephalios. That means sober, temperate, self-controlled. Okay. Let's see. I already got that. And then faithful in all things. The Greek word is pistos. Okay. Faithful in every respect. Holy, reliable. Okay. The helps, which is a word study of kind of a newer one than like Thayer's or the other guy, drawing a blank on his name, Strong's. All right, I mean properly faithful, loyalty to faith, literally fullness of faith, typically of believing the faith God imparts. Okay, so faithful definitely to her husband, to her family, to God. Right, to her brothers and sisters in Christ. Okay. Any other thoughts about those? And again, none of those are characteristics that any Christian woman or any Christian man should not attain to. Right? That's for all of us. And if we work on those things ourselves, then we make the elders' job and responsibilities that much easier, right? If we're willing to keep pushing ourselves towards these things. Okay. Any other thoughts on?
I just haven't heard the word trustworthy yet, and that's the one that comes to mind on faithful.
Okay. Maybe I scrolled too fast.
There isn't anything up there about prone to nag or anything like that.
Nagging.
What was that?
There's nothing in the scripture that says prone to nag,
Oh.
so I guess.
All right. So let's move on.
Scott, if I could just say one thing to close that out, I think if the wife goes with her husband to counsel someone, learns information, or if she just happens to be hanging out while the elders are having a meeting, somebody comes out upset or whatever, and then they share that information with someone else, well, it not only undermines her husband, it undermines the entire eldership, which undermines the church. I mean, it is extremely destructive.
Right.
If that happens, so it's not something to be looked at haphazardly. It's
Well,
a serious question.
And you could end up with somebody leaving the church and saying bad things about the church as a result.
No?
Okay, so, ladies, at some point, in the future, if your husband is being considered for this position, you got to think about yourself, whether you're going to be a helpmeet or an anchor, I guess might be the way to put it. All right, manage his own house well. 1 Timothy 3, 4, and 5, he must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? Okay? So, he quite literally says it. How he manages his family is a fair indication of his ability to care for the church of God. And of course, a big part of that, and he started with that, is keeping his children submissive. Okay? The word for manage there, it comes from the Greek word prostemi, okay, which has it's a military term, which means to superintend or to preside over, but not necessarily, and you'd be on the wrong track if you took it like a drill instructor approach. Okay, you'd be on the wrong track for thinking how an elder should behave if that was your understanding of that word. Okay, so primarily it means to govern or manage the house. You remember, I think, I don't remember if it's in his first term or second term, I think it was first, that Obama created a bit of a kerfluffle when he said we're going to rule. I don't even remember the whole context here, but I know he used the word rule, and that got some people's back up, his choice of words there. But most translations use some phrase like manage his own household, lead, be in control. That helps. I liked what they had to say. It's a pre-standing, referring to a preset or well-established character which provides the needed model to direct others, to positively impact them by example. And you've all heard and read enough about leadership to know that's the best form of leadership anyway, to lead by example.
That factors into my statement that the husband and the wife and the ruling of the family is a pattern that should be able to be laid over church. That the elder or the husband represents the head, all that. I'm not going to repeat it again, but the idea is there's already an established record that mirrors what he's supposed to do in the church.
Right. And again, now, when it comes time to decide, the only thing that is not so clear, and I don't really have this in my notes yet, is what do we mean by well? Because everyone's definition of well is going to be different, isn't it? Okay? Just like it is in any other consideration. So we got to kind of keep that percolating in our minds. I found this diligent to take the lead underlines the effectiveness of influencing people by having a respected reputation, one built on a solid track record. This happens by setting the example of excellence by living in faith. Richard said something a few weeks ago about, do you remember what you said, Richard, about, kind of like, you said something about like growing into the position or,
Well, the difference of leadership specifically is I've seen people who have been placed in a position of authority, but they are still acting as if they have done, they say they've had 20 years experience, but yet they've done their first 6 months 40 times over. So they've
Yeah.
never grown past the 6-month mark, even though they had 20 years time. So it's just the mindset of growing in a position.
right, so we're talking about a continually upward, path of growth here for what's under consideration. I guess an equivalent for a family is I can raise my kid until the point of the terrible twos, and then I lose it, so I have another baby and I raise them to terrible two, and I lose it. It keeps repeating that 2 years all the time.
It just occurs to me that this is kind of another backdoor, kind of idea of the importance of the candidate spouse, because, although there are defined roles in ruling the household, that they are your partner in doing so, and you can read all about that, first 8-9 chapters of Proverbs. You can look at the Proverbs 31 woman and see the importance of this person that you have chosen to be joined with, and how they are your partner in doing this sort of thing in the house. And so that does have who you've chosen and how they are. Definitely, it also has an impact on this as well.
Right. So having a successful partnership with your spouse is part of the consideration of managing your house well. If you and your wife can't get along, odds are your children are going to suffer as a result of that. All right. This is a little bit long, but I like what it had to say. Paul demanded that the church leader be exemplary in controlling his own family. He was to raise children known for their obedience and morally upright behavior. The verb for manage carries the idea of governing, leading, and giving direction to the family. The term demands an executive exercise of authority bolstered by a character of integrity and sensitive compassion. Its use in verse 5 with the verb take care of defines the quality of leadership as related more to showing mercy than to delivering ultimatums. I thought that was a very important consideration, not a guy that just bosses people around. For the father to see that his children obey him does not demand excessive force or sternness. It demands primarily a character and manner of discipline that develop a natural respect. Either the children show respect for their father, or the meaning is that his character and demeanor call it forth. This is not the Martinette's paradise, but is the Christian home in which the husband exercises love, as the context in Ephesians shows. Not a forced thing at all. I mean, if you got to force it, you've already kind of missed the mark.
Scott, what is a Martinette's paradise?
Well, a Martinet is an excessively strict person, like a drill instructor, for example.
I just never heard that term before.
But so it's not. I had an aunt. I never saw her do this, but I heard my uncle that was married to her say she literally made her children eat square meals. Do y'all understand where the term square meal? Like, I guess it comes out of the military, where you literally have to basically sit at attention at the table, and your fork has to come straight up and then come in at a 90-degree angle to your mouth, and it has to travel back to your plate that way. She made her children. That's a Martinet for sure. That does stuff like that. When her daughter got married, it was at their house. We saw my uncle and asked him how it was going. He said, "If I have to wash a light bulb one more time, I'm gonna." He had to wash the light bulbs and all the fixtures.
So
She was pretty wild.
an elder would have to be able to distinguish a theme from a mote. a gnat from a camel
Yeah,
in terms of, whether or not something deserves discipline or not.
right.
So I'm glad that we haven't even brought this up yet, because I think it shows a shift in the way the church talks about this, but I have heard this discussion focused almost entirely on the deacon's use of his personal finances. And I think although that's a piece, it's just.
Managing their house?
Although I think that's a small piece, it's much more, I think, the interpersonal family dynamic that's under consideration here.
Right. I mean, an elder, you know, he could be as poor as a church mouse through no fault of his own. But, you know, you're right. I think it had very little to do with that. All right. So, some men who desire to be elders fail here because they are never home. Okay, that's an important thing to consider, you know. And this would apply now more to guys, you younger guys that are working towards that. You know, you have to think, you can't do these things if you're not there to do them. And you can't say to your wife, you know, you raise the kids well so I can be an elder one day, as the next point shows. Ephesians 6:4 says, bring the children up in the training and admonition of the Lord, and that charge is given to fathers, right? So you cannot sub it out solely to your wife. So if you're a young man working toward that goal one day, you might have to think about what you do for a living and how often will it keep you away from your children and the influence that you're supposed to have on them.
I think this is so much more a modern problem than it probably was even at the time of this writing, because, I mean, you think about the sons particularly would have been working right alongside the father. You see that in so many
Learning the
places.
trade.
Well, I was thinking of the book of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah, how do they build the city walls? It's all, this family takes this section, this family takes this section. So they would have been right a close daily training.
And we could extend that out to beyond the household. If you have someone that wants to be an elder, but they're in a job that keeps them gone all the time, how can they know the flock among them? And how can they shepherd the flock among them? Okay, so we can see how the template of the family will fit over the template of the church. Okay. All right, it's 10:15. We'll stop there. We'll finish a few more things about this next week. And, well, actually, next week I will be out of town. Brady will be teaching the class. So in 2 weeks from today, we'll continue. Thank you.